Okay, we'd like to talk about tailoring the ADM now. As I mentioned before, the ADM is a generic method, just like TOGAF's a generic method, meaning we could be solving world hunger with one cycle, and the next time we want to solve the nuclear issues. So it can be applied to any industry. It could apply to large companies, to small companies, to government, to non-profits. So the ADM is very generic. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, to be useful, we need to tailor it. So I want to talk a little bit about tailoring the ADM. So one of the tasks that you must do is first figure out what building blocks of TOGAF and the ADM are relevant to your particular organization, to its maturity, to how EA will link to other frameworks that you have, other management approaches. So TOGAF and its ADM, they need to be tailored to your specific context. They need to be organization specific. So that's the overarching reason for tailoring, is that you really need to tailor it if it's going to have any credibility, any real utility. Now, you could, of course, train people with TOGAF out of the box. However, to make it really actionable, you need to tailor it. Some of the ways that you can tailor it, you could reorder the phases. For example, I gave the example, I think briefly, where I said you could finish technology architecture with a 1.0 version before you went into application architecture. Whereas in the book, it shows that you would have a 1.0 version of application architecture before you had the 1.0 version of technology architecture. Well, a lot of organizations say, I really need to know my network limitations, my hardware, my device issues before I commit to what apps I'm going to support. So they go ahead and show a different maturity in terms of versioning of the 0.1, 1.0 in terms of even how they address the ADM. Other aspects would be also the maturity of your discipline. So there might be fine-tuning around that, given, for example, that maybe your EA discipline very immature, but your PMO, your program management office, has a very mature approach. Well, you have to consider how you could be an enabler for that PMO rather as you mature yourself. And you could also integrate TOGAF and the ADM, primarily the ADM, with other enterprise frameworks such as change management, Lean Six Sigma, quality, and of course we were saying the project management approaches as well. So we have to see what all the touch points are, and that's why it really needs to be tailored, because every organization has different other methods and frameworks at different levels of maturity, and all that has to be synchronized and harmonized. So ADM is just one of many corporate processes that would make up a corporate governance model. When the ADM is being mandated for use by a prime contractor in an outsourcing situation, one would also need to say, well, how would I tailor what I'm looking for in the ADM with how the vendors actually do their work. So let's take one example that we're having someone do the engineering based on our architecture work. They're going to be doing the implementation projects, and we want to learn from those for our next cycle of requirements generated from the ADM. Well, let's say the vendor is using an agile approach to engineer changes. Well, we have to come up with a method that gets the feedback going to those agile teams, and from those agile teams to the architecture practice. So there's not a simple template for doing that, and that would have to be worked out on an organization by organization basis, and perhaps a vendor by vendor basis if you have multiple vendors doing slightly different versions of agile in order to realize the capabilities that you helped architect. So it can be rather sophisticated sort of tweaking that's involved here. So it's one thing to learn TOGAF basic book knowledge. It's another thing to actually refine it and tailor it for your own use, and you can't expect to have perfected that in the first 6 months of doing the ADM. But you can't do it at all if you don't understand the ADM, and that's of course one of our major objectives with this course, is that you understand it well enough to say, well, I get it, I'm going to have to see what all the touch points are, and I'm going to have to synchronize and harmonize with all those, and that's exactly the point. So you could have a small to medium-sized enterprise. You might want to streamline the ADM. I've had even large companies saying that, well, this is such a large body of knowledge, and tied with the ADM, those 10 phases and the linkage to the content framework and all the different guidelines and techniques to use the ADM, it's just too much. We're talking about maybe a $50 billion organization saying the TOGAF ADM is too much. Well, the point is you don't use it except as you need to use it. So again, even if you're a very large organization, you may roll out the ADM in smaller segments, what I call streamlining it to say what would be digestible. I'll use one quick example. TOGAF has 21 architecture principles, which we'll be talking about later. Well, you don't need to roll out 21 architecture principles all at once, saying, hey, we're going to use TOGAF and we're going to use ADM, and here are 20-something principles that will help guide us for doing business transformation. Well, people say, well, we didn't have any principles before, and now we have 20 of them. So there's a way to think about how to roll something out, even if you're a very large organization. I was doing training for Columbia University, and they were getting all of the out-of-the-box knowledge about the TOGAF and its ADM, and they were just shaking their heads saying, this is just too much. And this is a very prestigious university, and they're going, this is just too much. No one could ever learn this and apply this. And I'm going, well, let's continue into the day 4 of the training, and let's triage things. Let's simplify. And that's part of it. Let's practice tailoring the ADM. And they loved that part where we went through and saying, all right, let's just take 5 principles. Okay, let's just do 4 deliverables. All right, let's just do 3 techniques. And they say, oh, so that's how it works. Right, so it doesn't mean that's all the deliverables or the techniques that you're going to have a year from now, but just to get the ball rolling, you triage. You say, what are the most urgent things we need to help us mature our ability to do business transformation, and how can the ADM help? It's not about just dumping TOGAF ADM out there and saying, well, this is the way it's done. The way it's done is tailoring. And again, that does take some thought, some work, but it's not that daunting. I work with one organization, very large organization, multi-billion-dollar, global presence, and they tailored TOGAF within 6 weeks. So it's not that daunting to say how are we going to roll out our version of TOGAF ADM in the first quarter or something like that, because it can be done, it has been done. And keep in mind, though, that a very large organization could have, in fact, many separate enterprises. I did training at General Electric, and I had the head of GE Aviation in there, the chief architect for GE Aviation, and then I had the head architect in their utilities space. So they're all in that group, and they're saying, okay, how are we going to tailor the ADM for our different segments, because we're not really thinking about it for GE overall. So some very interesting discussions, but the same basic ADM can be used. It's nice to have a method that's very similar, that you can then, though, customize the content, meaning the deliverables and other work products, and customize the techniques and so forth for your part of your organization, your enterprise. On the other hand, you could have an extended enterprise. You're saying, how do we roll out the ADM to an extended enterprise? Well, that can also be done. And that's been done by American Express. American Express and IBM, they both have historically required all their architects to be certified in TOGAF, which, because the ADM is the key part. And why is that? Because they want not just all their architects, I should say, but all their architects and all their partners' architects to be certified in TOGAF, so that they can use the same language. So that's using ADM across an extended enterprise, that's again beyond your own, but still using the same basic framework and the method, the ADM. So TOGAF is often seen as very IT oriented. Well, it's true that its overall description of building blocks, list of building blocks and description of building blocks is IT oriented, but it's not just for IT companies. TOGAF and its ADM could be for any organization of any size anywhere in the world, but you may need to tailor the language so that you can talk about widgets, for example, and that's also very, very possible. One example would be Raytheon. Raytheon does very large networks and builds different elements that would make up a network. It's not just about the IT, it's about the hardware and so forth, the whole life cycle, the whole supply chain, supporting space missions, for example. They very much like TOGAF, and they like to train their very senior people, program managers, to be architects, to be very aware of enterprise architecture and TOGAF. So they end up extending this idea that TOGAF ADM is something that extend beyond the idea that it's just for IT-oriented organizations. It's for any major capability transformation. So that wraps up our discussion on tailoring the ADM. And again, it's something that really needs to be done, except if you're just teaching someone out of the box, well then you could just teach the whole thing. But when it actually gets to applying it, you really have to maybe get some help to say, how can we tailor this in an efficient way so that we can get buy-in from folks and get the benefits from it.